Let me ask you a question, and be honest.
Who?
Do I make you horny? Randy? Do I make you horny, baby? Yeah, do I?
God, I hope this is part of the unfreezing process.
Oh, turbulence! Oh, look at that! Oh, turbulence! Oh, I fell over! Oh, I fell over again!
Ow!
Oh.
Mr. Powers!
I will never have sex with you, ever. If you were the last man on Earth and I was the last woman on Earth, and the future of the human race depends on our having sex simply for procreation, I still would not have sex with you.
What's your point, Vanessa?
Hello, listening people.
Hello, baby.
I knew you were going to do it. I wanted to give you the ability to do it first. Hello, baby boy Bartek. How are you?
Good, Ryan, baby. Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing shagadelic, Bartek. I'm doing really well. We're spin Polish likely because we're always spitting, and we both happen to be Polish. That is why the show is named that. We are a podcast in which we talk about movies. This is our show Pictures Powwow, in which we talk about movies that have come recommended, and I recommended the movie of discussion for this one. It's so... Ooh, baby, yeah. We are talking about the first Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. Bartek, could you please make sure to let everyone know about, if they have or have not seen this movie, what they should do?
If you have not seen this movie, please be aware that we are going to be talking about it in depth, spoilers and all. And probably maybe even linking to the future films, so we might have minor spoilers for them as well. Who knows? Depends how the discussion goes.
Yes, and we should clarify, at the end of the last episode, we both agreed that we would watch the international cut, or as we called it, the Rob Lowe cut, but Bartek couldn't be bothered to do that. So our discussion will be about both cuts of the movie, and we can talk about the fact that there are different cuts of this movie, and why that is, and like just what a bizarre series of events that people may not even be aware of when it comes to Austin Powers. But first off, Bartek, could you please explain to us what your history and relationship with this film is?
So I know that the first time I ever noticed that Austin Powers existed was when my brother, my dad, and I went to a Blockbuster to borrow something. I think we were looking for a Harry Potter film, and we were, searching around the aisles, like, where is it? And my brother, because he was so young, he was just looking for anything that, like, slightly resembled Harry Potter, and he pointed at something like, oh, look, there it is. And my dad and I looked, and he was pointing at Austin Powers Goldmember, because I assume he looked at, like, oh, guy with glasses, that must be it. I'm like, no, that's not it. And then a few years later, my stepbrother and I, we borrowed the first film from Blockbuster, and we watched it, and we had a really good time with it. We really enjoyed it. And I know that later on we watched Goldmember, because we didn't know what the second film was, or even that it was a trilogy. And then later down the line, we got around to the second film. So that's the general history of how I got into the Austin Powers trilogy. But then beyond that, we eventually acquired online copies of the film, and I remember we would just watch them, over and over again, even after he left home. When I was about 13, 14, I watched the trilogy just over and over again. So in that span of time, I watched it a lot, and then it's been a long gap since seeing it, and then rewatched the first one last night. So it was, coming back to something from my past.
So you hadn't seen these in a very long time.
Oh, yeah, I think less than half my lifetime ago. I've turned into a weeb since I last saw it.
I always got the impression that you were far more familiar with this series of movies than that. For some reason, I've always just assumed that you and I had like this similar kind of like, yeah, we know the Austin Powers movies pretty well, because we referenced them quite a bit in our podcasting experience together.
Yeah, there was definitely large gaps in my memories of certain things, but there are always little things. I'm like, oh yeah, that was a thing. And then obviously the the things that stick out the most are the things that I would reference, like my favorite line from the second film, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And I'm surprised, like, the third one, and by your description, it was already out. It wasn't like a new film, like it wasn't in the cinema. Were you, like, did Austin Powers just fly by everyone in your family when it was around?
Yeah, I suppose it did.
I'm surprised. So, well, not really, because for people who don't listen to this podcast regularly, Bartek in his younger years, and you could still argue currently, lives in a cultural vacuum in which things that are specifically iconic to our generation, Bartek is like, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of that. I didn't watch it, or I know a bit of it, but I don't know any of it really. So this is just another case of that. Like, I have seen every one of these in the cinema when they came out. That's my history. And so that is my relationship. I loved these movies growing up. I really loved the second one in particular, and I still do. I have a very firm attachment to them. I remember very vividly seeing the second one in the cinema and remembering that opening, that cold open with the reveal of Vanessa and the musical number, the dance stuff, and the title cards, and it was such a great time, and you know, Mini-Me, and all of these things. I thought Mike Myers was this, you know, genius comedian guy. I'm like, who's this guy? He's just come out of nowhere with these Austin Powers movies. I remember owning the first Austin Powers on videotape, which is important because that is how Austin Powers, the franchise, became the franchise it is because it was a flop, it was a failure in when it was released, but it had a massive success when it was released on videotape and DVDs and so on the video market, and that is where the success came, and the interest was there enough for them to decide to make more movies, and then those next two movies were bigger successes in the actual theatrical releases of them. So this is also one of those success stories of a movie that didn't find its audience in the theater, found its audience very quickly and very strongly in the home release market. And I always remember, like, I was a part of that, and so was my family. We had these, we saw the, you know, we watched them, we bought them. It was a great time. And I haven't watched the trilogy in maybe like 5 years, perhaps. I want to say I watched it when I lived in my former share house with some of the people I lived with there, just because we can watch them. They're fun movies to watch with a group of people. And so it's been a little while since I've revisited International Man of Mystery. But I've always enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite. I would say it was my second favorite in the trilogy. So what was it like for you, Bartek, to come back to this one?
Yeah, it was really pleasant. Obviously, a lot of things slipped my mind since last seeing it when I was probably 13, 14. But a lot of it, you know, still stuck with me. The general plot progression, a lot of the gags, you know, being a bit more mature / immature. Certain jokes made a bit more sense now.
All the Seinfeld cast members that are randomly in this.
Noticing, yeah, actors who I'm now slightly more familiar with, that too.
Brian George.
I thought that was him. I was like, is that him?
Of course it was him. Of course it was him. We're the Soup Nazi too.
The Soup Nazi was the one that I noticed, obviously, yeah. Brian George, I was like looking in the credits, I'm like, oh, I couldn't see his name, but maybe I just missed it.
He looks exactly like Brian George always does, with that little mustache and that hair, and he's always in things. But you were saying about your experience with this, you were having a good time with it, and you know, the things that you had forgotten have come back to the surface again.
Yep, and also, since it has been such a long time, I tried to, you know, cast aside my ideas of, you know, what this franchise is, my memories of them, and try to look at it as like a sort of blank slate to see like, okay, well, how is this all being established for someone who's never seen this before? How's it going to work? And you know what? Looking at it from that lens, I think the film is actually really well made. Yeah,
I understand that. I could not separate my nostalgia for this one, so I will be gushing. There were so many lines, and not just lines, but line deliveries and moments in the soundtrack. As soon as they were happening, I was taken back to having watched this again and again and again and again and again as a child and growing up as a teenager and as a young adult. So, all the little gag set pieces and all the little things in the background, and it was a very joyous experience revisiting it for me. I was smiling from ear to ear. There was maybe a couple of things that I don't think work about this movie, and I think those are improved upon in the next film. And those mainly come down to budgetary constraints that I think affect this only in minute ways. But overall, I found the humor still made me laugh. I found the humor still fun and refreshing. I'm also, as I think you are, we are kind of, at least I am naturally drawn into one of these movies in which the whole thing is a wacky comedy character. Like, watch this comedian play this wacky character. Watch Peter Sellers play Inspector Clouseau. Watch Mike Myers play Austin Powers. Would you agree that you're similar with that kind of feeling about these type of movies, which in a way don't exist much anymore?
Yes, I agree. It's a lot of fun to see this well-defined character just, be played out. And also it's Mike Myers, who, growing up really liked his stuff.
What about him did you like? And also, you say growing up, but like you said, you didn't have as strong of an attachment to the Austin Powers franchise, which is his big thing when we were growing up.
Yeah, I guess it's just the few things that I happened to see him in, like the main ones being the Wayne's World films. I love the Wayne World films. I think we said it on a previous thing where I think of it as a duology, whereas most people have it separate. Shrek to a smaller extent, like I like Shrek, but it's mostly kind of a mimetic kind of series. And yeah, that probably would be it. But I do remember that when we did How So I Married an Axe Murderer on the podcast, years and years ago, I think I said in that episode that if I'd seen this as a kid, I think it would have been, something that I would have held on to and watched a lot because, it felt like another Mike Myers thing.
He did his fat bastard and Shrek voice in it.
Yeah, that's right. He did. Yeah, I guess it's just when
I did the
start
Austin
getting
Powers thing in which he played multiple characters, which he didn't do in Wayne's World, right? He was only Wayne in Wayne's World. He didn't play multiple characters.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
Mm.
Yeah, but definitely, yeah. When I got into Austin Powers and we had those, downloaded copies and that I just watched over and over again, it was just something that I was obsessed with at the time.
Yeah, I just knew him as Austin Powers. Yeah, I had seen his other films. I had seen Wayne's World. I had seen Shrek. I had seen How So I Married an Axe Murderer and Cat in the Hat and all of that, but he was always Austin Powers to me. And I love Wayne's World as well. I love that first movie in particular. But to me, he's Austin Powers all of the time. And it's interesting that as an adult and as a child, I am not as familiar with the era that he's pastiching here and the type of character he is homaging and configuring. Like, I understand the James Bond element, but I am not as familiar, as I've talked about here on the pod, with the 60s era, that 60s, British comedy and all of that era that obviously this is riffing from. But even as a child and even as an adult now, the iconography of the time that he is emulating here is so specific and so clear that even if you aren't familiar with it, you see it being done in this movie and you buy its authenticity. Like the musical cutaways of him like in a set with women and like him doing goofy stuff, or like the random dance numbers, or Burt Bacharach is always playing, and the music, yeah, a lot of it's the music cues, a lot of it's the visual stuff as well. But like, I, as a kid, didn't know those movies. I, as an adult, still am not familiar, but I completely buy that they nailed this 100%.
Yeah, definitely. And the whole 60s aesthetic, the funky font, the crazy colors, the fashion, the film is kind of dyed in Austin's personality, because the whole thing about this film in particular is this kind of temporal fish out of water. He's a 60s guy who's been frozen up till 1997. He's come out, the world has changed. But his aesthetics, the things he likes, and, you know, all the cutaways and things like that are very much him. So it's like he's still making his era known, even if it's something that's not known to everyone, you know, who's younger than that era.
And by the end, he is affected and changed by the current era. His teeth are fixed at the end, and they're shinier. And I was waiting for that moment, and then I remembered it's in the second one. I'm going to have that a lot. In which I was waiting for him in that moment to realize his teeth are bad and look in the mirror of the car, and the mirror would shatter at his teeth, but that's in the second one. Because he travels back in time and it makes his teeth revert back to how they were.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in the second one. But yeah, I think coming back to it, I want to talk about things that didn't work, because I think I have a lot more things that do work. What were aspects of this movie that fell flat for you or weren't up to snuff or have aged?
Oh goodness, I have to think hard about that.
She's a man, baby.
That's no woman, she's a man. Well, the first time that happened in the 60s, you know, that was, you know, a gag, but then with the Nigel's mother thing, that was just like a callback.
Basil.
Kind of funny thing. So, what did I call him?
Nigel. He's Basil Exposition.
Why was I thinking Nigel? Is there a Nigel in this franchise that I just...
No, it's just a British name.
Just a British name. Basil's mum, yep. No, neither of those two things bothered me. I'm trying to think. Did something not work for me? Maybe you start. I'll have to keep thinking about it.
My thing is, and again, this is influenced by the other two films, but visually, this film doesn't look as stunningly James Bondy as it could. It does have that flat comedy look to it, and the obvious these are sets look, especially the Dr. Evil lair and the underground and the caves and all of that. Again, I find it all charming, and it has an obvious iconography of these Bond movies, but I think there's just something lacking in the budget to truly capture those Bond aesthetics, whether it's the lighting or the textures or the color palette. Something has always been lacking in this first one, and I think it is just the budget and the direction of how to do that, which again I think is completely solved in the second film. The second film looks exactly like a Roger Moore era Bond thing visually, and I think that's always been one of my things with this movie is I just visually it's always kind of looked a little bit on the cheap side, especially the lighting is a little bit too like comedy lighting, like where it's bright and kind of flat. I always remember in my brain the inside of his jumbo jet being a lot more vibrant and a lot more like well lit and stuff. But when you actually watch it, it is very much like here's a flat shot with some flat lighting. And, you know, thankfully you have the costumes and the actors and all that kind of stuff to distract you from that. But I do think that is an element of the movie that I have always noticed, but I now understand it far more what I had noticed in the past. What do you think about that?
I definitely remember, and by the way, I also agree with you on the second film being my favorite one. I definitely always remember the second film being the most colorful of the trilogy.
And you get the moon base.
You get the moon base, yep, but even on Earth, like just everything's so colorful, and I think that has to do with it coming back to that 60s era. So in terms of looking at it as a trilogy, I do kind of see this first film as, you know, kind of not capturing that level of vibrancy because it's kind of reserved for the second film, but then that's kind of assuming that they're holding back. So, yeah. And definitely with Goldmember, the third one, I remember that one being a bit more like, you know, aged kind of thing. I remember the characters looking a bit older in that one, kind of giving you this sense of like, oh, time has passed. So yeah, the first one was this kind of middle ground. It didn't really bother me, but like I said, I do appreciate that about the second film.
I think another thing I have an issue with is pacing in terms of delivery of certain types of gags or payoffs to comedy beats. Like I feel like for instance, we get introduced to the idea of the fembots, and then it feels like we never see them again, and then they pop up again, and you're like, oh yeah, the fembots. It feels like they should have been more prevalent because of their introduction. And there's some things like that throughout the movie that I feel as well. Like, again, there are payoffs to these things, but something about the implementation of certain gags or plot things do feel like they're a little bit too spread out from one another and feel like they needed to utilize it. Like the fembots are iconic, yet when you watch this movie, they're barely in it. And they are, they're so far apart from one another.
I did always remember that they only had 2 scenes, but I didn't remember when the first one happened, like when you get introduced to them. I thought it happened much earlier in the film, but I think it happened surprisingly late, and I was watching the film just wondering, like, oh, when's the, when are the fembots going to get introduced? Like, I remember that scene. It's like Frow's talking about them, you got the song playing, the guards get killed.
Yeah.
It was odd. And I also forgot that random task was taken out in, like, the last scene.
Oh, I always remember that, because they used the penis pump to get him.
Yeah, I should have remembered that they fought him naked.
Yeah, well, yeah, they were in their little robes. But, yeah, there is that, and I think sometimes, and this is, again, the benefit of hindsight of the trilogy, there are some aspects, whether they be actors or characters or certain gags, I feel like they didn't know that they could utilize. Like, for instance, number 2 is great. Barely use him in the movie, though. They barely use him. And when they do, he's really good. But there's whole swaths of this movie in which he's just not around. Like, where is number 2 in sections of this movie?
Yeah, it definitely feels like the henchmen overall get a bit more used in the later films.
Yeah, they feel like they understand their comedic set-piece moments, which, again, you can see the wrinkle of and the echo of here. Like, there are characters like Scott or Frau von Bissner or what's the one that Will Ferrell plays again? Mustafa?
Mustafa.
Those people, they may not be in the movie throughout the whole entire thing. Like, one of them is killed very quickly, but they use their comedic thing effectively in the movie, where I feel like they fully exploited what you could do with them. But number 2, for instance, or Lotta Vagina, or Random Task, or Basil himself, they feel like they didn't realize what great comedic potentials could be mined from those characters. And there are gags and moments of this film that I could also point to that are very similar to that. Like, and that, again, is the benefit of hindsight. Like, in the next film, they know what to exploit far more. They know what to lean into far more. But here, there were some of those things that I felt like they really missed an opportunity to add more of this in here.
Yeah, that's all really good points, because one thing that I mentioned earlier, that I tried to watch this from like a blank slate as much as I could. It was really interesting to see the kind of structure of the film, where it really did feel like it was jumping between Austin Powers and Dr. Evil, almost like equal screen time in a way. Like, more so Dr. Evil in the first half, more so Austin in the second. And yeah, it really gave this sense that, like, this film, is particularly focused on the Mike Meyer performances and, what happens around him. And, one of the things that really highlighted that for me was when, Scotty was introduced. It
Scott!
was this, and to be honest, like, some of his scenes were probably the things I laughed at the most in this viewing.
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting seeing this, like, oh, okay, now they're introducing a, father-son neglecting long-term relationship kind of thing, and just, like, seeing them hit all the tropes of that, of, like, I hate you, Dad, and, like, trying to, get along with him, find even footing.
But Dr. Evil's
like
evil.
Yeah. And,
I had them liquidated.
Yeah, and just seeing the character, those Mike Meyer performances develop through the things that happen around them. Whereas, like we said, in later films, the supporting cast get a lot more to do.
I think an element too that I noticed, and again, this may be due to budgetary things, but also I think it was a dramatic choice, which is I can't remember what it must have been like at the time, but did it feel like to you that they were trying to hide the fact that Mike Myers was playing more than one role? Because there's a large portion of the movie, and again, it's a villain thing. They're hiding the villain's face, but when they do reveal Dr. Evil, it's quite a good chunk of time into the movie. It does feel like, oh, and it's Mike Myers. Like, there was this element to me watching it where it felt like this was supposed to be like a good, surprising reveal. And having seen the movie multiple times and seeing the sequels multiple times, it does feel like an element of the movie that's lacking is Mike Myers interacting with Mike Myers.
That is true. We don't get to see that until... Well, we see it at the beginning for a little bit, and then not until probably the climax.
But in the beginning, it's, you know, hidden of the face and certain types of shots and ADR. It's only towards the back half of the film in which we really get to feel Dr. Evil and Austin Powers bantering back and forth, which, isn't that some of the best stuff in these movies?
Yeah, now that you mention it's an element that we don't get too often in every film, but then when it happens, then yeah, it's all really good stuff. I didn't see it so much as hiding the fact that it's Mike Myers or trying to work around the fact that these two characters are in the same scene. I mostly saw it as like before we see Dr. Evil's face, he is mostly presented as this kind of menacing figure. He's got this like air of mystery about him.
He's a real villain.
Yeah, and then once we do see him, which is like post getting unfrozen and like killing Mustafa, stuff like that.
Mr. Bigglesworth.
And Mr. Bigglesworth losing all his fur. That's the point of the film where like we start getting to see just how silly and, you know, kind of pathetic this guy is. And, you know, that opens up the comedy. Now that we see his face, we see what he's really like, and he's very funny.
Yeah, I think, and I say budgetary thing because obviously a part of it is there's special effects needed to have the two of them interact properly, or really good choreography of doubles. I did notice in the scene in which he has Austin captured and he has Elizabeth Hurley captured, Dr. Evil's talking to the UN, and in the background you see Austin's clearly the double, but it's like the background is out of focus, but you can clearly tell it's a double.
Okay, I have to go check that out.
I noticed that. I don't, like, you know, these again, I think a lot of the criticisms I have of that is because the next two films improve upon those aspects. Whether you think the third one's better or not, which I don't, but I'm talking about things that do get improved upon that are weaknesses here or lesser here.
Yeah, once you know what the filmmakers decided to improve upon, you start to see, you know, before those improvements came in.
Like Basil. I forgot how little Basil's in this movie.
Yeah, same.
And how little they use him effectively. Like, he's here, he has his good moments, but the gags that come from Basil in this movie are far more the meta gag, right? Which I imagine you got the meta gag of his last name is Exposition, and every time there needs to be exposition, Basil's there, and Austin says, "Hello, Exposition," and then he proceeds to give it.
Yep.
Which, that's great, but I feel like Michael York isn't used to his best abilities here, which we will see in the second film in particular, in the second film.
He's got my favorite line, yeah.
It's shit, Austin.
It is shit, Austin.
I loved young Basil with his wig, and he's like playing it like he's a child, where he's just like got this nervous energy where he's like constantly moving on the camera screen. It's so
he's like meeting Austin for the first time, right?
Yeah, and he's like, "Hey, Austin."
He was very much a young scamp of the 60s.
I loved it. I loved Basil. I love Michael York. It's great to see a B5 actor in the Austin Powers movie.
Yeah, just the one.
Just the one of like 15, it feels like. So, yeah, let's talk about some aspects of the movie. Let's talk about the characters. Who's your favorite in this? Who do you get drawn to and get the laughs from?
Ooh, I've always, I mean, this is really obvious, but I've always really loved Dr. Evil.
What about this character is so great?
Yeah, he's got this look to him where he looks menacing, but like awkward things keep happening around him, and he has to somehow keep up this pretense that he's in control. Everything's, going his way. And then when he realizes things are not going his way, or like a mistake has been made, he has to somehow, save face. And usually that involves him, throw me a freaking bone here. I've been frozen. I need info. And obviously just from there, obviously his voice, it's, it's one of those voices that's really fun to do an impression of.
Yeah, I love Dr. Evil, of course I do. But I won't lie, Austin made me laugh a lot. I loved Austin, and I love the situations Austin was put in. Like, I love Dr. Evil because he's got, like, these skewering jabs about the genre. Like, he's the Bond villain, and he's making jokes about being the Bond villain. Like, with Scott saying, like, why didn't you just kill him? It's like, why would I want to do that, Scott? Like, I'll just assume that everything went to plan. As villains do.
Culminating in Scott, you just don't get it, do you?
Scott, you just don't get it, do you, Scott? But I really liked how Austin worked as a character, not just comedy-wise, but like, I actually forget until I rewatch the Austin Powers movies that Austin is actually a deep character. He's more than just the yeah, baby, yeah, or that stuff. He actually has arcs, and he actually has nuances, but they know when to make those stupid, like the classic moment in which he's reflecting on the bed about how everything he wanted is gone now because he's traveled into the future. Like Mrs. Kensington was never in his grasp, and now she definitely isn't. And then he ends a sentence with, "That train has sailed." Like an idiot. That train has sailed. Idiot. And
I've never noticed that before.
Yeah, right? You're laughing now. That train has sailed.
Like you said, he's so deep and
you're bought into his acting there because it's like a genuinely touching moment. But if you listen to what he said, it's stupid.
Oh my god!
And there's
I've never
another
noticed that before.
reflective moment in which she's sitting with him on the couch and they're looking at the videotape. It's like, I really forget that you've missed 30 years, and listing off all of these things. And the one thing he garnered was, and Liberace was gay. Who would have guessed that? He was like a massive ladies' man. That always makes me laugh because it's true. People really did think lots of people did think that Liberace, it was a shock that Liberace was gay, even though it's clear in retrospect how gay Liberace was. But like, I love the situations Austin gets himself into. Like I have referenced it on the podcast many a times, and sometimes people don't even notice, like you, the poker scene. The blackjack scene. The blackjack scene in which he bets a 5. And he's like,
he stands on a 5.
He stays on a 5, and then they're like, I suggest you hit, sir. And he's
I suggest you hit, sir.
He's like, no, I also like to live dangerously. And it's, you fucking idiot. I fucking love that scene. I love Austin, but yeah, Dr. Evil is the one people love so much because you know what he is straight off the bat. You know he's Blofeld from James Bond, but now he's like this weird European man with like this really detailed backstory of history, and they throw these weird gags at him of him trying to be like hip and cool and with it, but like he's a Bond villain. Like,
well, he does say, "I'm cool, I'm hip."
Yeah, after he does his little dance. Oh, so stupid. But he can't help but want to be a villain. Like, one of my big laugh out loud moments was when Scott is doing the whole conversation about like what he wants to do with his life, and he's like, right, and you see his hand hover over the button to press Scott into the thing. And Frau just hits his hand and gives Scott like a wink, like, yeah.
And that's how you like to live your life, do you?
Right. And then he just hovers his hand over. It's like, no. I love Dr. Evil. Did you have a favorite Dr. Evil gag or set piece with him?
His dance was really good. I think it was like the Macarena.
Yeah, pretty sure it was about that. he has a good amount. I love when he's planning. He's like, right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to make a laser, and we're going to get this laser and fire it into what they call the ozone layer. And it's just like, oh, that already happened. Mm-hmm. That whole sequence. And I loved his reaction of, screw it, we'll do the same thing that we always do. Steal a nuclear warhead and take the world hostage, yeah? And then he gives that look like, does that sound good to everyone?
He's like feeling the room, but like
he's
very much. I made my decision, but does everyone like this?
Is everyone on board for this? And also, like, would this still work? I know everything's changed, but is this still a good plan?
It's fun how in the second film they do a lot of the same gags, like scenes like that, but they do it like the opposite.
In reverse, like, because he's back in time.
Listing things from the future values. Like, that's too much money. That's ridiculous.
$100 million. And they start laughing, and he's like, oh, okay. Yeah, it's interesting to think, too, that we look at these characters, and, people do parodies of them, people like us do impressions of them, but I think not enough people give credit to how much dedication Mike Myers put into playing these characters, and I think that's what works about them. You can clearly tell that he is giving it his all with them. Like, he shaved his head to be Dr. Evil. That's not a bald cap. That's him with a shaved head. Right? Isn't that
He's
interesting?
A professional, yeah.
Yeah, right? Like, what do you think about the whole Mike Myers aspect of everything? Because, people, he's retreated from the world of entertainment for the most part. We've kind of discussed this in previous installments of Mike Myers related content, but let's touch upon it again. Like, what do you think about Mike Myers, and what do you think about him as a performer?
Yeah, I think he's always had that dedication. Like, he even though he is, a North American person, he definitely has familiarity with these kind of United Kingdom accents, like the English one, obviously, the Scottish one. There's a lot of them in his roles, and I think there might have even been a point where I thought he might have been of those cultures, because he just feels so, natural using those accents. And clearly he enjoys using them. So yeah, he does feel almost, in a way, I guess multicultural in that sense. Multicultural Western. Yeah,
he has this grasp on the UK sensibilities and the general European sensibilities, but is able to mold them for a general American audience. He's very skilled. I think he's one of the better comedic actors of his generation, because he was able to play very different style characters with that flair that it's Mike Myers, because he has his indulgences that he likes to do. Like, he always likes to play high energy characters.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to see him do a Daniel Day-Lewis performance. You're not going to see him be quiet and mild-mannered to the point in which you don't recognize it's him. It's always going to be noticeable that it's him. But Wayne and Austin Powers and Shrek and the Cat in the Hat, they're all very different characters, but they're all high-energy characters. One of the things I love about Wayne is a surprisingly bleak character. He has some really snarky lines that I often get sidelined at, because I always think of Austin Powers and Shrek and all of these things as a little bit more lighthearted, but Wayne will have some asides in Wayne's World that you go, Jesus, Wayne. The whole gun rack thing.
Now I'm tempted to pick Wayne's World for my next episode.
Well, is that a spooky month? Is that a spooky month pick? Is spooky when Ed O'Neill tells you about the soul?
Oh my god, it would be
from the body?
It would be October when it's my next pick. And you know what? I think my next pick's the 300th episode.
Yeah, so you got to make sure Paul Giamatti's in a horror movie. So good luck. But yeah, I want to talk about a comment that I've always laughed about, which is, everyone knows who listens to this that Austin Powers 2 was my sexual awakening because of Heather Graham. Loved Heather Graham when I was a child. I was like, this lady's attractive in more than one way that I can recognize. And I said this on the podcast one time when we had our good friend Sorab on. And Sorab said, just bluntly, "Oh, did you not see the first one? What about Elizabeth Hurley?" And I responded, "I was 4. I'm sorry I didn't recognize as a 4-year-old how hot she was in this movie. And I'm going to stake my claim here. She's a very attractive woman, but she's not that hot in this movie, especially when we've already done Bedazzled on this podcast. Thoughts?
No,
Because she's very different in these two movies.
She is, yeah. She's definitely got the devilish thing going on in Bedazzled.
Far more of the openly sexuality aspect, like the sexual, nature to her. Like she's much more showing, she's showing more flesh and curves and all of that. And she's playing that too. But here, I do appreciate that Elizabeth Hurley has to be the straight person in the movie, but I don't find her a killjoy either. And she's not the Bond girl in the way that you would expect the Bond girl to usually be, like the stereotypical idea of the Bond girl, which a lot of vagina is.
Yeah, towards the end, like when the climax is happening, when Austin, kills the fembots with his mojo, she is wearing that, like, kind of cat suit, though.
That her mum wore.
Yeah, so it felt like they were kind of aesthetically trying to get there towards the end.
She became an Avenger from the Avengers, like not the comic book one, but the British TV show that we did the movie of. That's what she became, rather than the Bond girl. Like, she had the big gun, and she had, like, black suit and, like, the hair up. She became more of, like, the badass female Avenger rather than the... And again, that kind of ties into why there's an authenticity to Austin Powers, because it isn't just... Austin Powers isn't just a Bond parody. It is an amalgamation of 1960s British cultural touchstones. And that is why I think the Austin Powers series has much more life to it than if it was just a beat-for-beat Bond parody.
One aspect of it that I was kind of surprised by when I watched it last night, and considering that this is something we bring up a lot with romance films that we've done, does this film have the best third act breakup?
Yeah.
I was really surprised by how much I bought it. Usually it's like, it's an actual breakup where the characters are like separated and something, effort needs to be done to get everything put back together. The character's like, if I don't do anything, it's over. We're already out of each other's lives. But in this one, it felt like a very genuine, like Elizabeth Hurley even says in the scene, if you want this relationship to work, things are going to have to, change. You have to be committed. It's not this is over between us. This is look, in a way, she's like saying, I'm giving you another chance, but in this very direct, reprimanding way. And then Austin's next little montage of like him being depressed and sad isn't that he's lost her or that, everything's over. It's that he's genuinely realizing the fact that his lifestyle isn't going to lead him to the happiness that he wants. And like, he's realizing, all this past stuff that I value, no longer applies to this world. And yeah, by the time they're in another scene together, they're getting along just fine. And Austin's just always making an effort to remind her, like, look, you are the one I love. And I thought that was really great.
They have chemistry for a start, too. Like, I really love the scene, the iconic scene of, do I make you randy, baby? Do I make you horny? What makes that work? There's two things very important to the Austin Powers character that makes these type of moments work. One, she is in on the joke. She rejects it, of course, and she's like, this is gross and disgusting. But when she sits back on the thing, you see Elizabeth Hurley as Vanessa doing the typical, I am so grossed out right now. But you can tell she's amused by Austin. She has little smiles and little chuckles to herself. But it's done in such a really naturalistic and honest way that it makes you endeared to Austin because, yes, he was being a gross pig, but also he was being openly honest. He was like, I want to fuck. Do you find me sexy? And, she rebuffed him, but she was amused by it, and that opens up an avenue. And the second thing that's very important to the Austin Powers being a very sexual character is, and people have really turned around on this aspect, like people growing up like we did, revisiting the movie, didn't notice this when they were children or didn't take it like as it is, which is Austin is about consent. He's about consent. Like, he wants to fuck, but only if it's consensual sex, because there's that scene in which she's like fucking hammered and she's like, let's kiss, and he very seriously is like, no, can't do that, it's not right, you're drunk.
Yeah, and he doesn't even seem like he's into the whole thing. He's like, no, we can't do it. It's clear cut. We can't do this.
Yeah, and in another person's hands, that could have been fumbled. Like, could you imagine a Seth Rogen comedy doing that?
My mind did immediately jump to the one where he's a mall cop.
Yeah. Well, that's different. That's a dark, fucked up movie. But like, no, and I think those things make him being an openly sexual character not feel as skeevy, because the narratives do make it that the women find it amusing, and it's not like they're turned on, they find it amusing, and thus it makes him the butt of the joke. And the second thing is Austin Powers knows where the line is drawn, not just the character but the film itself. They know where the line is drawn. And that's important to make him a likable protagonist to follow in your movie. And we're talking about this so heady and deep, but this is like what people would think is just a dumb comedy in which Austin Powers says, yeah, baby, and all of that. But when you're making a comedy film that has an actual narrative with actual characters and has an actual 3-act structure story, you actually do need to put in the effort to think of these considerations, or else it all crumbles apart. Like, Austin Powers is actually an emotionally resonant character. Like, when he stands up to Dr. Evil at the end about how Dr. Evil very half-heartedly being like, but peace failed, didn't it? Free love failed. Austin has like a genuine opinion on the matter that we've seen him develop in the fucking movie.
Yeah, I completely forgot about his response to that whole, we're not so evil, you and I. The thing you valued was evil. Like, I don't quite remember all the points in his phrasing, but it was essentially that, the spirit in which we decided to do the things we did, which are no longer acceptable, is still the same, and we will be able to express that in a different way that's now currently acceptable.
But now we have responsibility over that, and that is groovy. Because before we were irresponsible and it led to lots of issues, but now we understand what responsibility is. AKA,
that's it.
I, the character, understand the responsibility of my actions now. It's as simple as that. Like, I miss this in comedies, because again, people may not even think about this, but this is filmmaking. This is why this is a movie. This is why this isn't a Saturday Night Live sketch. This is why this is a feature film in which the story plays out, because Austin goes on a journey of self-discovery and realization, even though he's still making quips and gags, and he's like saying like, it's not mine, I swear, baby, and all of that. He has a genuine character growth. And he has those emotional, like, as a kid, I can't speak for you, but as a kid, my least favorite scenes in these movies were when the Burt Bacharach music plays and Austin Powers is being sad. Now, as an adult, they're my favorite scenes in a lot of ways. They're the ones I get gripped by. Like, it's so fucking good. Yeah.
I know that over the years you've mentioned that you've heard some people either saying it to you or saying it just in general, thinking that this film would have aged poorly, and you always thinking like, no, there's no way that's the case. And me, I was like, oh, well, I want to check it out again someday to actually see for myself. And yeah, I'm actually surprised at how well it holds up. Like, I knew I'd like it, but yeah, there's a lot of really good things here.
There's obviously stuff that's majorly aged, like some pop culture references, and the style of comedy is of its ilk of that era. But that doesn't mean, like, when people say dated, and that it comes across as a nice way of saying, like, not good for current day standards. That's what I get away when people say Austin Powers is dated. No, what they mean is what they mean is to say is I don't like it currently because it doesn't match the standards of today's scene. But I gotta then counter that by being like, what is the standards of today's modern comedy film scene? Because what was the last comedy film you saw in the cinema? Do you remember?
Last comedy film I saw in the cinema.
That was just an out-and-out comedy. That isn't like a movie with comedic elements. Just comedy film. Can you remember?
Not exactly, but when I think of the past decade, the only one that really comes to mind is like 22 Jump Street. I'm sure there's more. Oh, I guess Zoolander 2 was there.
The World's End, perhaps? Or...
The World's End. That was earlier last decade.
That's a while ago.
Yeah, that was like 2012, I think.
Comedy films are dying in a lot of ways, like films like of this magnitude. Because yes, Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery failed, but then it got so successful that it spawned a trilogy of movies like this. When was the last time we had a franchise like this of comedy films because they were made because people just wanted to have more of this character rather than they were trying to make a series of movies? Because that's what you do.
Medea?
Well, those are different though, aren't they?
I haven't seen any of them, so I don't know.
Those are different. You got me. The Medea film. I don't know if those are comedies at this point. They're lifestyles. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of merit here. I think I do miss the era. Like, Sacha Baron Cohen has work. He does the comedic character-driven movie, but his are very different. His are non-scripted for the most part, and the ones that are scripted are the weakest of his films. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about the Austin Powers movie outside of like more of the comedic scenes that we really enjoyed. Like, anything else other than that stuff you want to bring up here?
Yeah, it's hard. It feels like we've covered everything.
The soundtrack's iconic. I'll say that.
For sure, yeah. I didn't know that until I was reading up just after my viewing yesterday that Austin Powers originated as just like a persona for a band that Mike Myers is in.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
The Ming T. Like when the song played in the credits, the BBC thing, and then it was showing like, oh, these are all the songs that were in the films. Like, this song's by Ming T, and I was like, oh, I thought Mike Myers would have just like written that for this film. I don't know what this Ming T thing is. And then I realized, oh, okay, Austin Powers is older than this film.
Yeah, and the music, like the score, the Dr. Evil theme, iconic.
The one that goes like, da-na-na,
yeah, iconic. They use it 50 million times, but it's iconic for a reason. Like, I cannot stress enough, this movie has an iconic soundtrack. Like, there's an aspect I don't feel is dated from the movie. Like, there are no standout 1990s song that feels out of place. Like, all of the songs that were from the 1990s feel so appropriate or like so on point. Like the whole, I Touch Myself song that's playing when he's killing all the fembots. Appropriate. Of course it's appropriate. And there's so many other songs and so many other things that are just so on point. Like, I cannot stress enough that every time a song played, I was like, this is a fucking good song for this sequence. They knew how to spend their money in that regard. I'll say that.
Definitely this film's songs have been minor earworms since I first watched the film.
I want to
like I sometimes still think about, like, I Touch Myself playing in my head.
Yeah. Or These Boots Are Made for Walking.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to clarify, I was right. Talking about my generation is in the second Austin Powers film. I asked that at the end of last episode, and I said it feels like it's in an Austin Powers movie, and I looked it up. It's in the second film, which I thought it was. So I just want to say I was right, which
Good
we
job,
all kind
Brian.
of guessed. Bravo to me. Bravo to me. Thank you. Oh, I guess.
Congratulations.
Can we talk about, I think, something that is minorly lacking in the other two movies? And maybe this is just me being rose-tinted glasses here.
Random task.
No, but it's similar, which is I think the first movie gave one-off characters, like one and done scene characters, far more memorable things. Like there's so many like one and done little appearances in this movie, like Carrie Fisher as the head of the counseling group, or all of those characters. They're so memorable to me, and yet they're in like one scene. And I think this movie did a good job with that type of humor of the one and done walk on cameos, or the one and done little moments that just linger in my brain like that. Like the standout being Tom Arnold as the cowboy.
Yeah, that scene was really great.
Perfect. It's a perfect scene.
Like as a grown up, I'm now seeing like the kind of dual nature of all the lines that happen in that scene, and yeah, it's really funny.
I've mentioned that scene so many times on the podcast, and you always react to it like, yeah. Who does number 2 work for? Yeah. And now it's one of those scenes that you see it again, and you're like, oh yes, Tom Arnold, so good in that scene.
Sorry, you've really blown my mind. I didn't know that was Carrie Fisher.
Yeah, that's Carrie Fisher. Yeah, right.
Goodness, I have
This
to go watch
film
that
is
scene
filled
again.
to the brim with random appearances, random people showing up. Clint Howard showing up at the very beginning. And so many people are in here. And that will only be exemplified in the further films, maybe to an obnoxious degree. But here, it was really good. And I really loved the who does number 2 work for scene. I think I've used so many lines from that in my everyday life. Like
You show that turd who's boss.
Yeah, I've used that a lot. You show that turd who's boss. Can I tell you a moment that always makes me chuckle? And I fucking lost it when I watched it last night, which is when he says, oh, come on, a courtesy flush, please. And then there is a courtesy flush that is then proceeded to happen. Like, he asked for it and he got it.
How about a courtesy flush there?
And then he got it.
Yeah, he did.
I love the attention to detail for that. It's so stupid, but I love it.
I guess another thing worth bringing up is the 2 cuts.
Yes.
Is there anything? Yeah.
Christian Slater is in my cut.
Okay.
He plays a security guard that stops them when they change into the scientist outfits or the workers' outfits. And Austin uses hypnotism on him, and he's like hypnotizing him to do things like go across the street and grab him some orange sherbet. And he's like, give me your gum. And he's like, here's some gum. And when they're running out of the final sequence of events where the base is blowing up, he walks up to them with a giant tub of orange sherbet. And then the henchmen, when they get killed, the one that gets killed by being run over, it cuts to his wife getting the call and then sitting down with the son, like the stepson. And she's explaining to him how he got run over with a steamroller, and the kid's like crying about it. He was like, ever since dad left.
The main ones I know are the 2 black comedy, guys just got killed scenes.
And then the other big standout scene was, Rob Lowe, who would eventually go on to be young number 2, was the mate of the guy who got killed by the mutated sea bass, the ill-tempered mutated sea bass. And
they are mutated sea bass.
Rob Lowe on the phone receiving the news was pitch perfect because he plays it like dramatically, like he's crying and he's so sad about it. And then he walks over to his friends and he's just like, Smitty's, he died. And they're like, what? Decapitated by some ill-tempered mutated sea bass. And everyone starts crying and they chink a glass to him, and it's just so silly. And stuff like that is spread throughout the movie. And there's just little things that are extended, some scenes that are extended, and nothing too major, but those are the big major hitting points. I want to tell you one thing. I loved this movie so much that on my old computer when I grew up, and I don't know what happened, is this era over now, where you could change the noise your computer would make when it would log in and log out? You know, back in the day where your computer would make, if you had a Windows computer, say,
Yeah,
it would
you,
have the
you
music.
customize sound effects.
Do we not do that now? Is that over?
I mean, I think you can do it.
But it's not a thing that most people do anymore. I remember back in the day, people would really love to do that. I had that, and my one was the warm liquid goo phase starting when we turned it on, and then warm liquid goo phase complete when we turned it off, because I loved how she said that.
That's also a line that I really liked.
It's not funny, but it is in a way, you know. It's one of those ones that you can't explain it.
Maybe it's our early experience with ASMR. It's a really soft voice, kind of.
And just warm liquid goo phase is a funny line in itself.
Is.
Like what was
liquid goo phase?
The movie has a lot of those gags in which they have just very complicated words being thrown at you, and that's the gag because they say it's straight faced. Like the name of the club at the beginning of the movie is like this ludicrously long title. It's just like the Electro Swingers Pussycat Club or whatever it is.
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
just goes on and on. I think that's all I have to say majorly. Do we want to talk about Random Task? Do we want to bring him up? And what we know now, the darkness of life?
He was a very, very bad criminal, and he's been put away into prison.
And he murdered his cellmate when in prison.
Mm.
That tinges things, because this movie has two people who either did commit murder or have been suspected of committing murder. Which, do you know who the other person is?
Is it like Robert Wagner because of his wife or something like that?
Mm-hmm. The Natalie Wood, who mysteriously drowned on a boat. And Christopher Walken was on that boat, and many people suspect that Christopher Walken was hired to kill her. Very weird situation where the best gag that comes out of Jesus, people are dark. Where there's always been the gag of what wood doesn't float, Natalie. But
Right.
that's it. I will say it is important that Robert Wagner was in this movie because it makes Rob Lowe being in the second one the extra benefit of being great. Because we had a whole movie with Robert Wagner's number 2, and then we get a whole movie with the younger version of him, and you realize what a pitch-perfect casting they made. And it gives me my favorite line, one of my favorite lines, which is, number 2, you're so young and fresh. And Frau von Bischner, you're right. We could be here all day talking about all these great little Austin Powers moments and jokes and quips and all of these little throwaway moments, but I think that should be about it. We recommend it? Do we?
Well, I mean, it's dated, so not really.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
no, I do recommend it.
I recommend it. It's got Adira from Babylon 5 in it, so I recommend it. As a lot of vagina.
Yes, I couldn't unsee that.
Right? Welcome to my world. Back in the day before Bartek watched Babylon 5, ye would marvel at me being like, this person's in Babylon 5 in a one episode role. And you'll be like, all right. Now you've watched Babylon 5 and now you're in that world. Welcome, buddy. Welcome to the party that is B5 actors showing up in things that you've seen before.
When she was in the spa with Austin, it was like she was cheating on Mondo.
It was. How could she do that? Oh, well, she's... I won't spoil that. It's not... It doesn't matter. I like that she got defeated in this movie by being punched. That's it. They're just like, shut up, and they just hit her.
It works.
It works. That is it. We have the listening people's recommendation for the next episode, Bartek.
Ooh.
And I was looking over the list and checking it twice. And I saw one that leapt out at me, and I was like, is this a new recommendation? It must be. That's why
I put something on not too long ago.
My eye is drawn to it. I think it is another one of your stepbrother's recommendations.
Yes, he did recommend something. What was it?
Desperado.
Oh, that's right. He recommended
Robert
Desperado.
Rodriguez film starring Antonio Banderas, Salma Hayek, and Steve Buscemi. So, and Cheech Marin, everyone's favorite Lion King actor, Cheech Marin.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be talking about Desperado next time on the pod, so people make sure to check that film out. And you have to be 18 to watch it because it's an R-rated movie. This is one of the first R-rated movies I watched in full.
Ooh.
My parents owned it, and all I'll say is there's a moment of violence in the movie that I remember seeing, being like, I wouldn't have been able to see this a month ago. That was my reaction. I remember that as a kid. I was like, if this was a month earlier, I wouldn't have been able to see this moment of violence.
Yep. And for everyone's reference, this film is a sequel to a film called El Mariachi.
Yeah, which I have seen. I have seen that movie, but it's also one of a trilogy of movies, because then the follow-up is Once Upon a Time in Mexico, in which that movie just fucking ruins everything. But that's
I never saw that one.
That's a discussion for another day. That's a discussion for another podcast. Bartek, where can people find us on the internet?
You can find us on the internet at various places, such as Twitter, we're Spit and Polish Presents, that's our name. We're also on Facebook under the same name, Spit and Polish Presents. We upload our episodes to Podbean, and that gets distributed to YouTube and iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, Google Plays, Spotify, and just all the sorts of places. If you just Google us, you'll probably find us. And if you want to contact us directly with, what's the thing? Thoughts, queries, concerns? I think that's the thing you say. You can do that at spitandpolished@gmail.com.
Well, there we are. Thank you so much for all of that, Bartek. And thank you, listening people, for tuning in. Make sure to keep tuning in, baby. Yeah, I just, if this was another film, I would have walked in with us being like, here's the ending in which we do our wacky Austin Powers impressions. But like I said, I have such a sentimental and nostalgic attachment to it. Like, I don't feel like I should sully the good name of Austin Powers by doing like a wacky impression of Austin for an end gag joke. All I'll say at least is that I am looking forward to whenever we cover the second film. That's all I'll say.
Do you want to end it by doing a really shitty impression of Austin Powers, maybe?
Yeah, sure, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, baby, psychedelic.
It sounded like you had an orange in your mouth while you were doing it.
I was very inspired by Marlon Brando, yes.
Yeah. Oh, man. Fuck, you sidebar, you got me there. Can I outdo that? It's like the only way to outdo it is to do it with the wrong accent. Like, yeah, baby, yeah.
Jamaican Austin Powers.